Hello everyone, I'm Khurram Soomro and I'll be presenting my work from ICCV 2015. The paper's name is Action Localization in Videos Through Context Walk. This is co-authored with Harun Idris and Dr. Mubarak Shah. So before we move into action localization, I would first like to discuss about action recognition. So the problem of action recognition is that given these videos, action videos, we want to label each one of them. So usually we have a training set. We learn what the action looks like, and finally we label each one of them like this. This generally is a KV classification, so you have a number of actions you learn, and then one of them is chosen when you're testing. Moving on to action localization. So the task of action localization is a bit difficult. So not only you need to recognize, but you need to localize as well, that is detection. So when you detect an action, that could be in two types of videos, either in trimmed videos or untrimmed. In trimmed videos, what that means is that the length of the video is synced with the length of the action itself from the start till the end. And you can perform a spatiotemporal action localization, which means that you put a bounding box in each frame, and that's how you say that this is where the action is happening in a video. In untrimmed videos, it's a bit different. So here you might have a video which is of a longer duration, and the action can occur multiple times anywhere in the middle of the video. And you can either do a temporal localization, that means that you specify the frame number from the start till the end, or a spatiotemporal, which means that put a bounding box. To give you an example, so let's say we have these action videos again, and we want to perform spatiotemporal action localization. That means you need to put a bounding box in each frame, and that's how you do it. Apart from detecting the action, we also recognize them by assigning a label among the labels that you learn in your training set. Now, as you can see, this is a quite challenging problem, as there is a high articulation pose variation in this action localization problem, but there are other difficult problems as well, such as background clutter. So here the action is basketball dunk. So only one person is performing the action. However, there are several other people involved in this whole video, such as the players or the audience itself. So it is quite challenging to distinguish the motion from the action from the rest. You can also have multiple actors or actions being performed simultaneously, such as salsa spin, which involves two people, and you can have more than one group performing at a time. Action localization can also be performed in untrimmed videos. So here the action is hand waving, but it is not clipped to the size of the action itself, and you can perform several actions this way. For our problem, we're only focusing on trimmed videos. Now, I'll show you examples later on. Now, there are a number of applications for action localization. Let's say you have learned the action itself. You know how the action varies across time. Then you can perform a number of things, such as video search. You can also retrieve actions from videos. You have a data set, you know how the action looks like, you can retrieve videos that have that particular action. You can also do some sort of an event recounting. You can count the number of actions or activities being performed in a video. Or it can be used for general video understanding. Now, there are a lot of existing solutions to this problem. This has been going on for a while. But there are certain problems that haven't been exactly addressed yet. So generally how this works is that people learn an action-specific detector, and when they're testing videos, they exhaustively search for that action in space and time. So they'll either slide the window at multiple locations and scale to exactly localize the action. However, this kind of sliding approach is impractical and wasteful. So you, instead of looking everywhere and multiple scales, you could be evaluating thousands or hundreds of videos, hundreds of locations in a video. And when that video becomes of longer duration, maybe hours or so, or of a higher resolution, then this becomes a very challenging task. To address that problem, we propose this idea. So let's say we have this video, and I'm only showing the keyframes over here. We also given the ground truth. We try to learn the contextual relation in our training set. So we want to identify if there's any context present between different regions in a video. And that context is captured by 3D displacement vectors. So we have spatiotemporal displacement vectors, and we try to capture the action to scene, that is background to foreground relation, as well as foreground to foreground relation, shown by these arrows over here. by means of context, we want to localize the action in a faster manner. So instead of looking at every location, we want to get to the action or predict the action in a faster way. In this way, we can perform action localization in a far more efficient manner. We reduce the search space so that we only look at a few possible action hypothesis locations, as well as evaluate the classifier in a few windows or few QIs. And that helps us improve the performance. So the proposed idea is that first, when we're giving a training set for different actions, we want to build a context graph. So given a video, we segment the video into supervoxels. Here, the ground truth is shown by the green bounding box. And we build a directed graph over here, where each voxel is represented by one node, and the edges are directed, which signify the displacement vectors from background to foreground, as well as within the foreground itself. The foreground or the ground truth is shown by the green contour. We do this for every video of an action to get a collection of graphs, and we call this a composite graph, shown by Xi. Once we have this for all the actions in our training set, we move towards context walk in our proposed approach. So in our context walk, first, again, we segment the video into supervoxels and calculate the features of each supervoxel given by Xi over here. Once we have that, we build a graph again, where each node is one supervoxel and the edges are between spatiotemporal neighbors. So this is an undirected graph, and we form the edges only between spatiotemporal neighbors, whichever are sharing boundaries with each other. Once we have this graph, we start our context walk. So initially, we select our node randomly. So any node, we can select that, and then we try to perform the context walk here. So for our context walk, we select the node, and we search for nearest neighbor supervoxels from our composite graph. So the graph that I showed in the previous slide, we select the nodes that are closer to it using certain feature vectors. Once we have selected certain nearest neighbors, we'll get the displacement vectors shown by the directed edges in that graph and project onto our graph in our testing video, just like over here. Using these projected vectors, we generate a distribution, a conditional distribution for that particular step of our context walk, as shown over here. So voxels would be assigned different confidences based on the projection vectors from our composite graph. And this is telling us the confidence of the voxel belonging to that particular action. Once we have this, then we select our next node, because in walk we try to traverse the graph by selecting different nodes at a time for a certain number of steps. So once we have the distribution, we select the node, our next node that has the highest confidence, as shown over here. Once we perform this, then we'll repeat this process for a number of steps, T steps. And this is the whole gist of the idea for context walk. Once we have generated this, then we'll have a distribution for each voxel belonging to a particular action for the entire graph in our testing video. Once we have that distribution, we can perform segmentation using CRF, where we distinguish the foreground action from the background itself, and then we apply SVM for the final recognition of the classification process. To go into further details for context walk, this is the similarity function that we use to retrieve our nearest neighbors. So once we select a node from our testing graph, we use the features of that particular node to retrieve nodes that are similar to it from our composite graph. After retrieving those, we'll have a displacement function shown by h delta that will project those vectors, those directed edges, onto our graph in our testing video. This will generate a confidence for each supervoxel, as shown over here. This conditional distribution will assign a confidence to each one of them. Now, this confidence generation is produced at each step of the walk, but somehow we need to combine all of them together to get one whole distribution. And for that, we integrate these confidences using this decay function. So we assign a certain confidence to our current distribution as well as the distribution that we got in our current step of our context walk. Once we have this entire distribution, then we can select the next node depending on whatever the highest confidence is in that graph. Now, for each voxel, we generated some confidence using a context walk that tells us that it belongs to the action itself or not. But that's one type of confidence score. However, we want to independently look at each voxel and say whether it belongs to the action or not. And that is something what we call specificity, or the distinctness score. So that will specify if this voxel belongs to a particular action or not. So let's say we have a training video, we have different voxels, we know the ground truth. We try to cluster these voxels together, such as shown over here, and we generate a confidence for each cluster. So that confidence or percentage will tell us how many voxels belonging to that cluster are from the foreground itself. So that is a general confidence that the voxels that are only belonging to the foreground should be clustered together, and that will assign a higher confidence. Based on that, we have the specificity function that checks the distance between the feature of the supervoxel to the centroid of the cluster, as well as the confidence of that particular cluster itself. Using these two confidences, we apply CRF, and we use that in our unity term for CRF, conditional random field. Here we have the action specificity as well as the context walk score. Combining these two as well as the binary function over here, we apply CRF to give us the final segmentation of these actions. Now we can have multiple segmentations for each one of them. We'll apply SVM to get a classification score. And that's how we get the localization in a testing video. All right. For our experimental setup, we use improved dense trajectory features. We use bag of words to represent these trajectories. And for retrieving the neighbors from a composite graph, we only use 20 nearest neighbors. So although there might be thousands of voxels present in our composite graph, but we only use 20 neighbors to project vectors onto our graph in our testing video. For context walk, we only use 5 steps. So earlier, if you were to apply sliding window approach, you might be evaluating window or classifier at thousands of locations. But in our case, because we have segmented regions, we only use 5 regions to get those displacement vectors and project those onto the testing graph and get confidence for each one of them. That significantly reduces the complexity of the method. And finally, when we have our classification step, we use SVM with histogram intersection kernel. All right. Now, when we use supervoxels, as we all know, supervoxel gives us a hierarchy, multiple levels of segmentation. And it is really important to select the right levels of segmentation. For example, a video shown over here, if you select a different level from our hierarchy, each number tells us how many voxels are present in that particular video. So if you have 10, 20, 60, and so on, we need to know which one is the right one. Either we can apply in all levels of a hierarchy, that will be too computationally expensive, or we can somehow efficiently select the right level of a hierarchy. And as you can see over here, this action might be better represented by either 20 or 60, because that captures the segmentation pretty well. So what we do here is we find the maximum overlap of a voxel in our training set with the ground truth. And here what this shows is the x-axis is the supervoxel hierarchy, right? The different levels of the hierarchy, 8, 20, 60, and so on. And the color shows the overlap of a particular voxel with the ground truth itself. And it shows that it peaks at a certain point and it reduces as you go on, because the number of supervoxels increase and that reduces the overlap. So we use our training set to find out which hierarchy is best for a particular action. And we use that when we are computing the testing score. So to give you an example, we try this out on UCF Sports. So here I'm showing the overlap of 10 different actions. And as you can see, for different actions, there's a different overlap that might relate to either the size of the action or the actor relative to the scene, or the length of the action itself. And that voxel would tell us some cue that this level of a particular hierarchy is better for this action or not. Based on this, we use this hierarchy to get to localize in an efficient way. For our experiments, we use 3 data sets. We have UCF Sports, Sub-JHMDB, and Thumos 13. I'm showing some qualitative results here for UCF Sports. As you can see, instead of just putting a bounding box in our final localization, we actually have the action contour, which is more accurate than just putting a bounding box. The yellow contour is our result, and the green one is the ground truth. And you can see that we can get a much more finer segment of the action. The label is the predicted label of that particular action. We have some more results for Sub-JHMDB. So each dataset has a different type of action. They could be from sports or general activities and so on. And finally on Thumos 13. All right. Now, for quantitative results, we generate two types of graphs. One is receiver operator characteristic, ROC curves, and the area under curve. So here we compare with the state-of-the-art methods. So we have about 4 methods evaluated on this data set, and our proposed method shown by the red curve performs better than the state-of-the-art, which generally use sliding window approach. The key idea behind this is instead of using all possible windows, we avoid certain windows, and that helps us improve performance because we are also avoiding false positives in our case. And that really gives us a boost over here. For Sub-JHMDB, that has about 316 videos with 12 action classes. Here, if you notice, we compare with this ECCV14 method. That method also evaluated a baseline. Now, this baseline is using improved dense trajectories along with Fisher vector. However, in our case, we just use the bag of words representation, and we're still able to perform better than the Fisher vector representation. And finally, we evaluate on Thumos 13. Now, this is by far the most challenging spatial-temporal action localization data set. It has over 3,000 videos with 24 action classes, and we are the first one to report results on this data set. So we computed a baseline using a sliding window approach, using improved dense trajectory features, and here is our result over this data set. And here I'm showing the area under curve at different overlap with the ground truths, from 10 to 60%. For some analysis, we also computed individual components contributions. So as you know, we apply several steps. We compute the specificity, we compute the context walk, we apply CRF, and then finally SVM. We wanted to see whether each one of them is contributing to the method or not. So here first we use the specificity score, or the distinctness score of the supervoxels. And here I'm showing the ROC as well as the area under curve. When we apply context, it significantly boosts the performance. So here we're using the context plus the specificity to segment the action and then recognize it. After that, we apply CRF to get a more finer region. This involves some smoothing, uses binary and unary potential, and that really helps in our method. And finally, we have the SVM localization. SVM really helps because when it learns during a training process, it uses the entire ground truth which has all the supervoxels together. So that is really learning what kind of supervoxels combine together to form the action. We also try to look at the complexity analysis. So here I'm showing a comparison with two state-of-the-art methods. First one is spatial-temporal deformable part model, SDPM. That one also uses sliding window approach. It tests on different locations and scale. We also compare with action tubelet, that is using supervoxels, and it uses hierarchical clustering to combine the supervoxels at multiple hierarchies. And at each hierarchy, it has a different number of voxels. So the complexity of our method as compared to theirs in terms of search space is significantly less. So we only use 5 steps with an application of CRF to get the final action localization. To conclude, we provide an efficient and effective way to localize actions. We use contextual relations in the form of 3D displacement vectors to learn the relations between background and foreground, as well as within the foreground region. And finally, we use context walk to get to our action in a faster manner, to predict in a better way. All right. Thank you.